Now it was Artemis's turn. I felt it. It was a sort of amusement mixed with eagerness, rolled with some bloodthirstiness. She wanted me. She had seen how I had manhandled Lieber, and she wanted some of it for herself. She rode a stag with antlers like silver. Accompanying her were some 10 or so maidens riding does, whooping and hollering most unladylike at me. Artemis paid them no heed, but instead held out her hand. A white wood bow with 3 arrows tipped by stars was handed to her by her nearest attendant. Her head was crowned with stars and a silver crescent moon that rose above her forehead. She was clad in Greek-style clothing of an unmistakably ancient make, but was bound by leather belts at places that would have otherwise embarrassingly flapped in the winds. In a motion graceful and sure as a gymnast's, she stood on the back of her stag, her sandaled feet more sure than a mountain goat. "Jack Morrow!" she cried. It was impossible that I could hear anyone at my speed, with the power of my engine. "It has been given to me to test you. I was allowed by heaven 3 arrows. Come now. Let us see if you are worthy of favor and gifts, or if you were ever a false servant of the power no one in this cavalcade can bear to name." With that speech she strung the bow, 1 foot on the stag, 1 on the bow. She drew one of her own hairs from her head and tied it swift as thought to one end of the bow, and pulled it taut against the other. She plucked the bow to test it. The arrows she had laid across the stag's horns. She took the first and checked it to see if it was straight. Then she knocked it with the perfect elegance of a perfect huntress. She was perfection. I had seen her size me up. I learned things from her eye movements I had never before considered. As she aimed, I noticed 1,000 little micro-movements of her body, of her eyes, of her head. I could tell where she was aiming just because I had now seen a demon mighty enough to be called a goddess work her magic. I knew that the shot at Lieber had been lucky, ensured a hit by his own hubris. Now I knew how I could have made that shot, even if his Pegasus had dodged. I was in trouble. She was staring straight at my driver's side back tire. I was not going to be given a warning shot. The draw was fast. I might have a microsecond to react, but the quickness of her aiming would mean I would have to wait until after her fingers had left the arrow. So I waited. I gripped the wheel, ready to spin it whatever way would keep me alive. Her eyes came to rest, and I felt it. With the slightest twitch, she let go of the arrow, and I threw my car to the right, spinning and nearly losing control over and over again. The arrow passed by, struck the shield I had put over the wheel. It pinged and flew into the air. I could see it fly up and out, until it merged with the night sky stars. I couldn't tell if it was a new star or it had always been there. I steadied my course. My car was low and heavy. It wasn't going to flip easily. It was hard to wrestle against that weight into a straight and even momentum. The edge of the bumper left the road and into the mass of the shadow dogs yapping at me to drive into a ditch and be torn apart. One landed on my hood, howling into my windshield. I hit the brakes and sent it flying. It rolled on the road. I could have killed it. Instead, I dodged. Artemis, being what she was, I don't think she would take a hunting dog being smashed well. I was not sure where her god reputation ended and her demonic traits began. I wasn't scared of Lieber or Darren Sire or Imran Goddaughter or even Mordred Pas Dam. I was scared of Artemis. Sweat covered me from my glove-protected hands to my shoes. She could end my run right here, right now, if she decided to give a test too hard to pass. She tossed her hair back as she saw me gain control of the car. Perhaps her eyes softened when I passed the dog. Perhaps not. Her maiden body, swaying as gracefully as willow branches in the breeze, stiffened as she prepared herself for her next strike. Her hand plucked up the second arrow as delicately as a mother holds a precious Christmas ornament. She checked it like the first and nodded with satisfaction. With motions as smooth as silk, she drew the arrow to her ear. She aimed at my engine. How I knew this past the windows and metals I knew not, but only that she aimed. Her thin mouth, which had not once parted from a grim line, twitched into a smile. She then threw her arm up, the arrow aiming into the sky. Did she mean to elope? No. I felt the danger grow. I wanted to roar, but instead hissed. I couldn't lose concentration. I saw her in my rearview mirror. Where was she aiming? I couldn't tell. It was too high. She let go of her arrow, and it flew into the sky. It twinkled, and then flew down. I wrestled with myself. Left? Right? Should I brake? Should I accelerate? Push my car into the red? Realization and peace settled on my soul, and I wrestled my instincts into submission. I would not mindlessly react like an animal. There was no way I could tell where it would land. None. I would drive the road and let it land where it would. It twinkled, brighter, falling faster. I kept my eye on the road. When I glanced to check the rearview mirror, I saw Artemis drinking from a goblet handed to her by one of her maidens. Another time she was sitting primly on the back of her stag, and a pair of her maidens were combing her black hair. I gritted my teeth. I gripped the wheel and kept the car straight on its course. I still didn't have a good name for the car. I wish I did. I thought about pithy phrases for Lieber, but nothing came. Demonted executioner? Maybe? It felt wrong. I'm sure it would come to me. I tricked myself to stay calm by thinking about anything else. It was all I could do. The arrow landed, striking the road behind me and to the left. If I had not conquered myself, I would have likely struck it, as there was more room to the left and braking was easier than accelerating. The strike shattered the concrete. The star tip did not wink out, but instead exploded. The shockwave nearly threw my head into the wheel, and the rear wheels left the pavement for more than a few seconds. Rocks and dust flew through my open window. Heat washed over the paint job, and parts of my body not protected by clothing felt sunburned. I prayed she hadn't given me radiation poisoning. The car drove on. I was still conscious and still had plenty of gas in the tank. My secret weapons were still showing green. The engine didn't even hiccup. I looked in the mirror and caught sight of Artemis and her hunting women. She was standing on her stag once more. While her mortal maidens coughed and choked in the dust, she did not react. Instead, she took her bow from the stag's antlers and checked the string. With agonizing slowness, she picked up the last of the star arrows. She checked its straightness and knocked it against the string once more. Her eyes played over the car, looking for another target. Inspired, I ripped off my left-hand driving glove and gave her another target. I could see her eyes widen. I had no idea what the arrow would do to my flesh, but I kept it out there, firm against the winds my wild riding was creating. My hand splayed wide and flat, trying not to get it ripped out of its socket. My coat sleeve flapped in the breeze, snapping like a flag in the storm. She considered it. I could see her maidens pointing and shouting. Some said to take my hand, others to strike my car. A few even pointed at my hood ornament or at my wheels. She made her choice and let fly. The strike burned the top of my hand, but it cut straight. A little of my blood flew out, and one of the Valkyries caught the drops in a vial, which she gave to Artemis. I was going to regret this someday, I'm sure, but better a small cut than an immediate death. I pulled my hand in, and on the straight way I slipped the glove back on, grimacing at the pain of the wound. In the mirror I saw Artemis sniff the vial, smile, and hand it to one of her maidens. She saluted me with her bow, and with a graceful bound her stag leaped into one of the clouds that had flown nearby. She sat on its back side saddle, sipping from a cup of wine. Her entourage followed. I had passed the second hunter. Now it was open Jack Morrow season. The next few attacks were elven-looking nobles throwing spears or firing arrows at my car. The armor shrugged them off easily. I took a swipe or two at anyone too cheeky for my liking, and they fell back, not wanting to come near my open window out of respect for my shotgun, nor wanting to be run down by my ironclad juggernaut. I wove enough to avoid fire aimed at my wheels and burst through a wall of logs aimed to skewer me through the windshield. I got out of that one with just a crack. My car held strong, and I expected it to do it again. We were now truly in the mountainous terrain. The foothills of Denver were forgotten. I followed the course of the Interstate 70 like a boatman down a river. Up and about me, Valkyries still flew, not willing to get stuck in the melee. I sped through a fog bank to find another group of elves around me. These rode horses and wielded bows. I had played this game before. I grabbed my other 1887 shotgun and fired a slug round to one of the horsemen too close for comfort with his arrows. I used the lessons gleaned from Artemis's trial. His chest armor crumpled like wrinkled tissue paper, and I could see his ribs shatter from the force of my weapon. I worked the action and sent another shot into his followers. The rest fled, and the Valkyries took the body away. Darren's sire came up behind me faster than I thought possible. While I was mostly surprised at the speed to which he pushed his howdah-bearing mammoth, I had stayed well above 100 miles an hour whenever possible. The massive war beast trumpeted defiance. I honked back. Sire, resplendent in silks and jewels, smirked at me via my rearview mirror. On his lap rested his massive sword. Women, mostly unclothed, accompanied him and fed him grapes or held up wine cups. One held a golden tray of meats and cheeses, which another made into cracker sandwiches to feed him. I didn't trust Mercy with $50, but I'd have paid more just to have some answer to his ostentatiousness. His howdah was tied to the poor mammoth by golden ropes and the roof supported by gilded columns. As the mammoth charged ever closer, I could see more opulence. A blind elfin violinist played vigorously on the roof, dancing from carved dragon head to mounted dragon head, arraying the roof all around. Printed silks fluttered in the breezes, and tassels glittered in the moonlight. At the neck where I'd seen Hindus and Africans ride in our own non-outre-terre world, sat the driver. His eyes narrowed at me. He was a dwarf, well-muscled, stout, and vicious. He wore nothing over his dark-skinned chest. Instead, armor plates crisscrossed his well-defined pectorals and covered his heart and vital organs. His beard was black as pitch, but braided with white ribbons and golden thread. A massive ruby sat at his well-coiffed tip. I swung to the side. I didn't want to waste the fiery gigs yet, but they were on the table. I took a few poorly angled pot shots, but did little more than cause Sayer and his harem to laugh. His driver kept him well away from any favorable shots from my guns. I tried to get closer, but the mammoth's tusks were wicked, pointed and capped with diamonds that cut the very air as it galloped. The trunk was armored, ending with a morning star, and my bullets missed its sensitive head and eyes. Elf tricks for sure. I put on a little speed to keep my car ahead of the monstrous cavalry behind me. It was luxurious, but such an eyesore. I considered the road ahead. There were some mountain tunnels coming up. I'd lose him there. His howdah would be his downfall. The mammoth kept pace, hooting its trunk for all it's worth. I was really going to regret hurting that beast, but the thought of it trampling me without regrets gave me solace. I'm sure they fed it orphans or something. The mammoth put on a burst of speed, catching me by surprise. and swiped its tusks across the side of my car. The passenger side window cracked and I lost that side's mirror. The tires held and I couldn't hear any scraping from inside my engine. Cosmetic damage. This time. I wouldn't be so lucky the next. It reared up its head to strike at me once more. I could see Darren Sayer stand up in his howdah, and his harem disrobe him of all his silks. He wore only a loincloth, and lifted his overly long sword to deliver a death blow in tandem with his mount. I hit the brakes. Sayer didn't swing, but his mammoth did. It overswung and stumbled, its neck going too far up, too much momentum to stop at once. I turned wide around it, hit the gas as much as I dared. I was not going to risk redlining my car yet. I saw Sayer sit back down and take his fingers to his mouth. He blew a single note, piercing even the noise of the engine. His smirk still shone through the night, but I saw a hint of anger. One of his scantily clad harem girls put a horn to his lips, and he spoke into it. The dwarf nodded his head and let the mammoth slow down. Howls and whinnies cut through the night stillness ahead. In front of me, leaping from rocky crags and up from the Eagle River that lay alongside the road, animals and monsters gathered up into a mass, charging towards me with everything they had. Dogs, goats, bears, a rhinoceros, lions, tigers, a panda, and a host of other beasts, half one, half another. Foremost, a unicorn, white as snow, wielded a horn of twisted gold. It tossed its mane and galloped, point down. Behind me, the mammoth sped up. Sayer now leaped from his howdah with a grace that belied his foppishness. It was one of the most magnificent moves I had ever seen. His mad, blind violinist danced upon the roof, zig, 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 in something like the dance macabre, but perfected, wonderful, terrible. Sayer, his sword in hand, stood at the tip of the mammoth's trunk, which coiled and curved as the Pliocene monster panted. His bare chest shimmered in the starlight. His sword was ready to strike. His hand cupped his waist. His toes gripped the mammoth's fur, and his legs balanced expertly in the snake-like appendage. He was ready, and the mammoth came closer. The herd ahead matched it. The unicorn would strike me at the same time as the sword, but only if I did nothing about it. I pulled out my brimstone shotgun and fired what rounds I dared to in the scant seconds I had, my hand working the receiving mechanism as best it could. The dogs howled in pain and stopped to gnaw at the phosphorus burning through their fur. A few of the goats and great cats rolled and screamed. The rhino rampaged, striking others and gutted the bear. Only the unicorn stayed on target. I saluted it, having no time to reload my spent shells, and gave everything to the gas. I could now smell the mammoth, even with the speeds, the wind, and my panic. Sayer surfed the undulating trunk as skillfully as a ballet dancer, his sword ready to strike, the seconds reduced to a single gasp of breath, and I struck the button for the fiery gigs. The trunk of the car sprung open and spinning chains attached to powerful fireworks burst forth. They were not accurate, but the mammoth was too close to matter. They wrapped around the mammoth's mighty legs and caught, spinning around and exploding, shocking the mammoth, tripping it, and sending it smashing into the ground, with all the force of a meteorite. Sayer went flying, headfirst into the road. Sword under him, the violinist smashed into the rocks. The harem tumbled, and the dwarf was crushed under the immeasurable weight of his mount. The unicorn, for its part, did not falter, but leaped, aiming for my heart through the extra-strong bullet-proof windshield, crack notwithstanding. I cut to the right, and instead of glass, the horn found my metal frame. The unicorn faltered, and I caught the back legs with my spiked hood ornament, and brought it smashing down on my hood. Gravity in the road dragged it under the car. Blood, rainbow-colored of all things, splashed from the bumper to the windshield. Some even got inside the car from the open window. It smelled like a pine forest mixed with lemon trees and heady wine barrels. With a sound like carpet being ripped by movers, the head was torn from its body and got stuck on the hood ornament before it could be lost on the road. I made it to the tunnels, and despite all the pandemonium, I saw Sayer's headless body rise, pick up his head and set it once more onto his shoulders. He glared at me until I was out of sight. It was unfortunate, but I would have to think up a name for my car involving unicorns. With no one close to talk to, I said, I'll have to bear laughter from the monster hunter types who haven't tangled with unicorns. The unicorn head did not reply, for which I was grateful. The tunnels were nice and peaceful for the first half. I used the time to clear the windshields with the wipers and reload my shotguns with the one-handed mechanism my crew made for me. The 1887s had been a great choice. The lever action was easier to one-hand in the car than the pump options, while maintaining driving stability. It felt good to get a breather. On the occasions I could see the sky above, I saw Valkyries hovering, following my progress. My own progress surprised me. I had run well over 2/3 of the race. Well, assuming they hadn't changed the mile markers, or some other trick. Imran Goddaughter and Mordred Padam remained. I had a trick for the last one. I hadn't told Marovich about it, but I figured I could avoid some pursuit in the last few seconds. Mordred had the look of a man who would sit back as the final boss of the hunt, right at the choke point, where it was do or die. Imran, however, had a spooky ghost woman in white aesthetic going. I anticipated terror above power. I waited for the first signs. I saw something like legs dancing in and out of my headlights. I was not about to play hide-and-seek, so I hit the floodlights. All around my car were striped spiders bigger than my body, barely keeping the pace. Beetles the size of Volkswagens scuttled beside me. I passed cicadas flying lazily at speeds slower than the speed limit minimum. A dragonfly flew past me like a fighter jet. Earwigs and cockroaches filled the gaps. The light set them hissing, and a few tripped and fell only to be trampled by the rush. I rolled up my window and tried not to panic. I'm not squeamish about insects, but their sudden and silent appearance hit my innermost core. For a few seconds I ran with the beetles and spiders. I kept my eyes on the unicorn head still stuck as my hood ornament. The turns were getting vicious, and I dared not slow down too much. A spider looped some of its web onto my car, sticking to it. My car ripped it from the ceiling and dragged the beast behind me. There was a thump and another thick strand of spider silk struck the top of my car. Another spider dragged to its death. Then another. Another. The car started to struggle with the weight of the spider corpses. I swung left and right, bashing into the unmoving beetles beside me. The spiders started to jump on my car, some even landing long enough to slide off the metal. Not a few times did I see them lose footing and hit the wheels, their shining black eyes squishing under the rubber. Others tried to mess with the hood, only to have me brake suddenly, sending them flying forward. I rode them down like the rest. The air began to smell like their copper-based blood, and I did not like it. Their thoraxes burst apart whenever I smashed one, and their legs flew in every direction. One time, one of the massive dragonflies simply plucked a spider out of the air and ate it piece by piece in front of me. My mind clouded with panic. I did not like this position. Who knew where it would lead? I needed enough speed to break through any web traps they might have for me, but I wouldn't if the spiders held me back. Someone sang, and the hissing came into tune. I could see the sword-like spider fangs stridulating. Poison from them marred my paint job and boiled on the hood. I checked my rearview mirror. Sure enough, I saw Imran Goddaughter, pale as death, operatically coming for me as if cued by Wagner himself. She was dressed only in a billowing scarf that moved to keep her modest and immodest at the same time. Her lips glowed ruby red while her black hair flowed behind her, defying physics itself. I could see pointed teeth behind those lips. She saw me watching her and threw her head back in a howling laugh. Her ghost-like banshees matched their mistress. Their hair lacked refinement, more like an explosion, but still retained her gravity-defying powers. They screeched and sang as the whole group lightly jumped from beetle to beetleback. They danced and wafted in the breezes and the turns. Some kicked off the slow-moving cicadas or surfed cockroaches as they moved over or under the hordes of insects and spiders. They never touched more than a few bare toes onto the backs of their insectoid horde. The song did little except distract me. I prepared a trick for them, letting them get closer, ever closer. Their hands and bodies striated and quivered in the pleasure of the hunt. Their exaggerated emotions could only be described by the cover of romance novels. They threw themselves into the air, into each other's arms, and upside down to dance on the ceiling. Even the spiders coordinated with their song, hitting the silk threads at the high notes and hissing with the low. I held firm. I needed them to be closer. I couldn't recall how many seconds my little trick held, but I needed to make it count. One of the banshees did a backflip over a jet-fast dragonfly, and another did a complex set of swing dance moves with her companions. I was going to be killed by an elfin cheerleading squad. At least the spiders will get dinner and a show. The beetles changed into an open pattern, certainly preparing for their mistresses, and I got ready. The tunnel was going to be straight for a few long, but too long seconds. I rolled down the window and prayed to God no spider would crawl into my cabin. Emberin leaped into range and I hit the oil slick. I could hear the sprayers doing God's work. The beetles, spiders, cockroaches, and others behind me started to slip. The thousands of immense insects and arachnids were pushed by their companions forward, deeper into the oil. Some of the banshees even fell into the mass of wallowing legs, fangs, and horns. They tore exoskeletons, flesh, and the soft, strange tissue of insect joints in panic, pain, and confusion. The light on the oil slick button blinked red and the sprayers started to lag. I took the risk and stuck my arm out with the brimstone shotgun and fired into the oil. I saw a small spider coming for my arm and couldn't appreciate the inferno blazing behind me. I turned the wheel to the right, pulling in enough to save my arm. In the blink of an eye, the spider, only the size of a large dog or small pony, caught the door and scuttled into my car before I could raise the window. I lost my composure. Panic tore through my mind and I beat it about the cephalothorax with my shotgun butt. Its black eyes on a gray carapace looking at me without emotion. I couldn't reach any of my other guns. It was over my slug shotgun and my 1911 wasn't easy to reach. My knives were too slow to pull to kill one of God's perfect killing machines. It skittered up and down the cabin, trying to avoid my beating, but also looking for the spot to attack me. It didn't have room at my back, thank God, but it came around moving as fast as thought. It reared up. I could see its fangs, its grasping pedipalps, its furry legs in detail I will never forget. It prepared to jam its venom-filled fangs into my body, stridulating with a sound like the screams of the damned. Then it reared up too much and it gave me room to work. As fast as I could, I spun around my shotgun Terminator style and blasted it right at the center of its leg mass. Like Arnold did, I nearly broke my hand in the maneuver, despite the modifications to allow its use. It was worth it. The brimstone rounds burned through the spider and cooked it alive. At such close range, the damage was intense. I prayed none of the burning material would fall on the ammo. The spider's death throes took it up and down, screeching and dying, kicking its legs into my face, scratching me terribly. I kept it away as best I could, but I took a lot of blows. At the same time, I nearly ran off the road, and with the Colorado River on the particular side, that would have been the end. I all but passed out from the smell of the dying spider. With effort, I grabbed the burning barrel of the 1887 with my hand and shoved the dying thing into the crook of the dashboard, where the passenger's legs would be. I kept it there until its spasms ended and the terrible sounds went with its horrible soul to hell. I breathed. I couldn't pick out Emmer and Goddaughter from the chaos behind me, so I heaved a sigh of relief. The spiders and insects were unwilling to leave the cave. I could see their glittering eyes and the fires behind them. I'd see the terrors for the rest of my days. Then something slapped the back of my car. The mirror showed me a dagger, a pale white hand attached. Ember and Goddaughter pulled herself up to the trunk, her beautiful face alight with battle fury, her hair a little singed, but I had not put a single mark on her skin. So I hit the brakes and watched her slam her face into the rear windshield. The blood spray was satisfying. She fell back with a scream like the dead waking to life, and I hit the gas, driving away. I saw some Valkyries attend to her, so I counted her part done. One left. Mordred Padam.